My name is Faye Holland, and I am 26 years old. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end. I want to start by telling you what kind of person I was before everything changed, because I think it matters. I wasn't someone who made dramatic entrances. I drove a 2014 Honda Civic with a dent on the rear bumper that I kept meaning to fix and never did. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building that smelled faintly of other people's cooking every evening around 6 o'clock. I packed my lunch every morning in a blue insulated bag I bought on sale 3 years ago. I taught third grade at Maplewood Elementary School in Portland, Oregon, and I loved it more than I ever admitted out loud, because in my family, being a teacher was something you did when you couldn't do anything else. That was the version of me that existed on a gray Tuesday morning in mid-autumn, when the leaves outside my window had gone the color of rust and the sky was the particular shade of Portland overcast that means it will rain before noon. My grandfather, Walter Holland, had died 4 days earlier. He was 91 years old. He passed quietly in the early hours of a Thursday morning in a hospital room with a window that faced east. I had been there the night before, sitting beside his bed while he slept, listening to the sound of his breathing slow and even out, watching his face. A face that had always looked to me like a map of somewhere important. When I left at midnight, I kissed his forehead and said goodnight. By morning, he was gone. The grief I felt was the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. It settled into me like weather, like the cold that comes in under a door you can't quite seal. Grandpa Walter was the one person in my family who had always spoken to me like my thoughts were worth hearing. He had taught me to play chess when I was 8 years old, sitting across from me at the kitchen table of his old house with a patience that never seemed to run out, explaining not just how the pieces moved, but why. The logic beneath the logic, the way every move you made had to account for 5 moves you hadn't made yet. He used to say, "The most dangerous player at the table is the one everyone else has already dismissed." I thought he was talking about chess. I was wrong about that too, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The reading of Grandpa Walter's will took place on a Tuesday, 3 days after the funeral. The location was the office of Mr. Gerald Garrison, Walter Holland's attorney for the past 22 years. The office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, with dark wood paneling and leather chairs and the particular kind of quiet that expensive places always seem to have, as though even the air inside has been vetted. I arrived 10 minutes early. Everyone else was already there. My father, Trevor Holland, 58 years old, sat at the far end of the conference table in a charcoal suit he reserved for occasions that mattered to him financially. He was a compact man with gray at his temples and the permanent forward-leaning posture of someone who had spent 30 years making decisions he believed were the right ones. He had built Holland Maritime from a 2-boat regional shipping company into a 12-vessel operation that moved freight up and down the Pacific coast, and he wore that fact the way other men wear expensive watches. Not to show off exactly, but to make sure you noticed. My mother, Delia Holland, 55, sat to his left. She was dressed in a black Chanel-style suit that had come from an actual Chanel boutique, and her posture was the posture of a woman who had attended enough events in her life to know exactly how to sit in a chair when she wanted people to take her seriously. She had touched my arm when I came in and said, "Oh, sweetheart," in the tone she used when she felt sorry for someone, which I had never entirely understood because at that point, none of us knew anything yet. My brother Cole, 30 years old, sat slouched in his chair in the particular way he had of taking up space without appearing to try. Cole was good-looking in the easy, effortless way that some people are, and he had always moved through the world with the assumption that things would arrange themselves for him. Not because he was cruel about it. He wasn't cruel. He just genuinely seemed to believe that the universe had organized itself with his comfort in mind, and so far, it mostly had. My cousin Brooke Lawson, 32, sat across from Cole with her husband, a financial analyst named Greg, who wore a Patek Philippe watch and used the phrase risk-adjusted return in casual conversation. Brooke was sharp and socially precise. She always knew exactly where she stood in any room, and she spent considerable energy making sure that position was as advantageous as possible. She caught my eye when I sat down and gave me a smile that managed to be both warm and slightly pitying at the same time, which was a skill I had to admit she had perfected. Mr. Garrison entered at exactly 2 o'clock. He was a tall man in his early 60s with the manner of someone who had read a great many wills in his career and had long since stopped being surprised by what people left behind or who they left it to. He set a leather portfolio on the table, adjusted his glasses, and began. The bequests came in order, and I will tell you what each one was, because the contrast matters. It is the contrast that tells the whole story. To Trevor Holland, Holland Maritime in its entirety, the business, the fleet, the dock leases, the client contracts, the operating accounts. Market value at the time of appraisal, $28 million. My father's face did something complicated when Mr. Garrison read this. Relief and satisfaction, and something that looked almost like confirmation. Like a man hearing something he had always believed about himself spoken aloud for the first time. To Delia Holland, the family property in Sonoma Valley, California. A 4-bedroom estate on 11 acres with a vineyard that produced about 800 cases of wine per year, including all furnishings, artwork, and associated equipment. Estimated value, $22 million. My mother made a small sound in the back of her throat that she quickly converted into dignified composure. To Cole Holland, the collection of 14 vintage and classic automobiles Grandpa Walter had accumulated over 40 years, along with a 3-bedroom penthouse apartment in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. The cars alone had been appraised at over $4 million. The penthouse at 3.2. Cole did not pump his fist because Cole was too cool for that, but I saw his jaw relax in a way that told me he had been holding tension there since we sat down. To Brooke Lawson, the sailing yacht the Walter, a 47-foot blue water cruiser docked in Newport, Rhode Island, and a 4-bedroom vacation property on Cape Cod. Together, these were worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 million. Brooke squeezed Greg's hand under the table. He squeezed back. Mr. Garrison paused. He looked up from the portfolio. He looked directly at me. The room shifted. One of those invisible shifts that you feel before you understand what it means, like a change in air pressure. And finally, Mr. Garrison said, to my granddaughter, Faye Ann Holland. My heart was doing something strange. It was hammering and very still at the same time, which I know doesn't make physiological sense, but that is the only way I can describe it. Grandpa Walter had always been closest to me. Everyone knew this. It was not a secret, not even a politely avoided topic. He had spent more time with me than with anyone else in the family. He had called me on my birthday every year without fail, and not just to say happy birthday. He called to talk, to really talk, sometimes for 2 hours about things that mattered, about books, about ideas, about the way the world worked and the ways it didn't. Surely he had left me something that reflected what we had been to each other. I leave this envelope. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Cole laughed. He tried to swallow it and failed, and the sound he made was the sound of someone who has been suppressing laughter in a church and finally loses the battle. Brooke covered her mouth, but her shoulders were moving. Greg looked at the table. My father stared at the window with the expression of a man who has decided he is not responsible for what is happening. My mother put her hand on my arm. Her touch was gentle. Her voice was gentle. And what she said was, I'm sure there's something meaningful inside, sweetheart. Maybe a letter. You know how sentimental he was. But I could hear it in her voice. I could hear the thing beneath the gentleness, the thing she was trying to keep covered but couldn't quite manage. She thought it was funny. She thought it was appropriately funny. The kind of funny that confirmed something she had always suspected about the order of things in our family, about who mattered and who was the afterthought. Maybe it's a gift card, Cole said, and then immediately said, Sorry, that was bad, while still smiling. Brooke said, Don't look sad, Faye. I'm sure whatever it is, it's meaningful. The word meaningful landed the way she intended it to, which was as a synonym for small. I stood up. The chair made a sound against the floor that seemed very loud. I need some air, I said. I took the envelope from where Mr. Garrison had placed it on the table in front of me. It was a standard white business envelope, the kind you could buy in a box of 200 at any office supply store. It had my name on the front in my grandfather's handwriting, Faye Ann Holland, in the deliberate architectural script he had always used, the kind of handwriting that belonged to a man who had learned to write in an era when that still meant something. I walked out of the conference room. I walked down the hallway. I pressed the button for the elevator and stood watching the floor numbers descend, and I could hear faintly through the closed door the sound of conversation resuming. My mother's voice, Brooke's voice, Cole saying something that produced another ripple of laughter. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. The doors closed. I was alone, reflected in the polished steel, and I opened the envelope. Inside was not a letter, or rather, it was not only a letter. There were 3 items. The first was a small card, the size of a business card, but thicker. Heavy cream-colored stock, the kind that feels substantial in your fingers. On it, in my grandfather's handwriting, "Trust activated on your 26th birthday, sweetheart. Go to the address below. He's been waiting. Grandpa Walter." Below that, in the same hand, an address in Monaco and a suite number. The second item was a business card, printed on it in clean, dark type. Elliot Ashworth, Senior Trust Manager, Ashworth & Weld Private Wealth Management, Geneva, Switzerland. On the back, again in my grandfather's handwriting. "He manages everything. Call him first. The number is on the front. Tell him your full name and your mother's maiden name. He'll know what to do." The third item was a document, a single page folded in thirds. I unfolded it. It was a statement from a private Swiss credit institution, the kind of institution whose name I recognized from financial news articles I had read, the kind that only existed for people who required privacy as much as they required returns. The statement was addressed to Faye A., Holland Beneficiary, Holland Legacy Trust. The balance on the statement was $312 million. $312 million. I read it again. I counted the zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 zeros. My hands were shaking, not trembling, shaking the way hands shake when the body is trying to process information the brain hasn't caught up with yet. The paper made a sound, a dry, rustling sound in the elevator silence, like something trying to escape. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. A man in a raincoat stepped back to let me exit, looked at my face, and then looked away quickly in the way people do when they can see that something very large has just happened to someone and they don't know whether to acknowledge it. I walked through the lobby. I walked through the revolving door. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and stood in the gray Portland air and let the light rain that had started while we were upstairs fall on my face. $312 million. The blue Honda Civic was parked half a block away. My lunch bag was in the passenger seat. I had packed a turkey sandwich and an apple and a small container of hummus with crackers because I had been careful about spending money my entire adult life. I stood on that sidewalk for a long time. That night, I sat at the small desk in my apartment with the envelope's contents laid out in front of me. I had looked up Elliot Ashworth before calling. This was not difficult. He appeared in several reputable financial publications, quoted as an expert in multi-generational wealth management and international trust structures. Ashworth & Weld had been in operation for 63 years. They managed assets for some of the wealthiest families in Europe and North America. They were exactly what the business card said they were. I called the number at 9 o'clock in the evening, calculating that it would be early morning in Geneva. The phone rang twice before a receptionist answered, and when I gave my name and asked for Mr. Ashworth, she said, without a moment of confusion, "Of course, Miss Holland. He's been expecting your call." He had been expecting my call. I was transferred. There was brief music, something classical, piano, unhurried. Then a voice came on the line, British accented, measured, warm in a professional way that felt genuine rather than performed. "Miss Holland, I am very glad you called. I am sorry for the loss of your grandfather. He was an exceptional man." "Thank you," I said. "I have his card, and I have a bank statement that I need to understand." "Yes, I thought we might speak about that." For the next hour, Elliot Ashworth explained the Holland Legacy Trust to me. He explained it carefully and completely, without condescension, which I noted because I was aware that he was speaking to a third-grade teacher in a one-bedroom apartment, and not to the kind of person such explanations were usually delivered to. The trust had been established when I was 15 years old. My grandfather had been 80 years old at the time. He had gone to Geneva, not for the first time. He had a long-standing relationship with Ashworth & Weld, and he had put into legal motion a structure that would take 11 years to fully activate. "Why 11 years?" I asked. "Your grandfather was specific about the timing. He wanted the trust to activate on your 26th birthday, not before. He had a theory about 26. He believed it was old enough to have made real mistakes and learned from them, but young enough to have the energy to use what you'd learned." Why didn't I know about it? This was the question I needed answered most, and Mr. Ashworth answered it in a way that made complete legal and practical sense, which I want to explain carefully because I know it might seem impossible that something this large could have existed this close to me for this long without my knowing. Mr. Garrison, the same attorney who had just read the will that afternoon, was one of 2 trustees of the Holland Legacy Trust. He had been bound by a strict confidentiality clause for 11 years. Every piece of legal correspondence related to the trust had been routed through a P.O. box maintained by his office, not by me. I had never had reason to check that P.O. box because I had never known it existed. As for the money itself, the trust did not pay me a salary. It did not deposit funds into my account. Instead, beginning when I was 22 years old, the trust had been paying certain fixed expenses on my behalf through an intermediary property management company. My rent, my health insurance premium, my student loan payments. I had believed for 4 years that my landlord offered a reduced rate for teachers. He had told me this when I signed the lease, and I had been grateful and asked no further questions because I had always been a person who accepted good fortune quietly rather than interrogating it. My grandfather had arranged all of it. Miss Holland, Mr. Ashworth said, I want to be clear about the current value of the trust holdings. The statement you have reflects the liquid assets, the cash and investment portfolio. The total value of all trust assets, including real property and business interests, is approximately $890 million. I had been holding a pen. I set it down. How? I said, and then stopped because that was not quite the question I was trying to ask. I started again. What does it hold? What are the assets? That is a conversation best had in person. Your grandfather asked that you come to Monaco before we discuss the specifics. He felt the context would be important. He planned for me to come to Monaco. He planned for you to come to Monaco, Mr. Ashworth confirmed. There is a first-class ticket waiting for you at the Air France counter at Portland International Airport. Your grandfather arranged it 6 months ago. 6 months ago, my grandfather had bought a first-class ticket to Monaco and left it waiting at an airport counter for a granddaughter who, as far as anyone in the family was concerned, had just inherited an envelope. I sat with that for a long moment. I'll go, I said. I need a few days to arrange things at work. Of course, there is no urgency. The trust has waited 11 years. It can wait another week. The 3 days before my flight were among the strangest of my life. I went to school, I taught fractions and read Charlotte's Web aloud after lunch and helped a boy named Marcus. Not a Marcus. I need to protect here, just a small boy with a gap in his front teeth, sound out the word triumphant in a sentence. I packed up my classroom for a substitute, which I told my principal was for a family matter following my grandfather's death, which was true. And I did not tell my family anything. There was a dinner at my parents' house 2 days before my flight. The whole family gathered. The energy in the room was of people still processing windfalls, still turning their new realities over in their hands like objects bought in a foreign country. Cole had already called a classic car appraiser. Brooke had contacted a real estate agent about the Cape Cod property. My mother had looked up Sonoma Valley estate renovators. So you're really going to Monaco? Cole said when I mentioned the trip. Yes. With what money? The ticket is paid for. By who? He said it with genuine curiosity, not malice. Grandpa arranged it, I said. My father looked up from his phone. That's odd. What would be the point? I don't know yet. My mother set down her fork. Faye, honey, Monaco is... It's a particular kind of place. It's for people who, you know what I mean. The hotels alone. Are you sure you have the budget for this? The ticket is first class, and it's fully paid. The accommodation is arranged. By who? By Grandpa. She and my father exchanged a look. It was the kind of look parents exchange when they have decided something about a child and don't want to say it out loud in front of that child. Well, my mother said, in the voice she used when she was deciding to be generous, I suppose it could be a nice little trip. Just be careful with your spending, sweetheart. You're on a teacher's salary. I know what I'm on, I said. She patted my hand. Of course you do. I looked around the table, at my father scrolling through messages, at Cole showing Brooke photos of car restoration shops, at my mother adjusting her place setting out of habit. And I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. Not anger, not grief, something quieter and more fundamental than either of those, something that had been present my entire life and was only now, for the first time, beginning to feel like information rather than weather. They had no idea, not just about the trust, about me, about who I was and what I was capable of and what I had been doing in every conversation with Grandpa Walter for 26 years. They had always been kind to me the way you are kind to someone who doesn't need to be taken seriously, warmly, generously, without attention. I ate my dinner. I said goodnight. I drove home in the dented Honda Civic, and I packed a bag with my 3 best dresses and every piece of composure I possessed. The night before my flight, I sat for a long time in my apartment. I looked at the space around me. I had lived here for 4 years. The walls were the off-white of a landlord who has never replaced the paint. I had hung a print from the Portland Art Museum on the wall above my desk. A Georgia O'Keeffe, a flower so large it filled the entire frame, all color and geometry, nothing apologizing for its own scale. I had always loved that print. I had never quite let myself think about why. I picked up the bank statement from the desk and read it again. $312 million. Liquid. Just the cash and investments, not counting the properties, not counting whatever business interests existed that Mr. Ashworth would explain in Monaco. $890 million total. I put the statement down. I thought about my grandfather, about the last time I had seen him, 3 weeks before he died, sitting in the wingback chair by his living room window with a cup of Earl Grey going cold on the side table because he always forgot to drink his tea once he got talking. He had been sharp that day. Not the diminished, tired version my mother occasionally described when she needed to explain why his decisions didn't make sense to her, but fully, entirely himself. We had talked for 3 hours. He had asked me what I thought about the future of urban logistics, specifically, whether self-owned small businesses in regional freight could survive against consolidation by larger players, or whether consolidation was inevitable and the question was only how to position a smaller company to be acquired on favorable terms rather than unfavorable ones. I had said, the businesses that will survive aren't the ones that try to compete on scale. They're the ones that compete on relationships, on knowing their specific geography and their specific clients better than any large company ever bothers to. He had looked at me with that look he had, the one that always made me feel like I had said something more interesting than I realized. And he had written something in the small notebook he kept in his shirt pocket. I had thought he was just being kind. I sat in my apartment and looked at the Georgia O'Keeffe on the wall, and I thought about what it means to be seen, really seen, by one person. How different it feels from being seen by many people in the wrong way. How it can sustain you for years, the way a canteen of water sustains a person in a desert, not abundant but enough, always just enough. The most dangerous player at the table is the one everyone else has already dismissed. He hadn't been talking about chess. He had been talking about me. I turned off the light. I set my alarm. And before I fell asleep, I made a decision. Not about money, not about property, not about any of the things that were about to change. I decided that whatever I found in Monaco, I would not rush. I would not react. I would do what my grandfather had taught me to do at a chessboard. Look at the whole board before I touched a single piece. I fell asleep to the sound of Portland rain, and in the morning I drove the dented Civic to the airport, took the ticket from the Air France counter, first class, Portland to Nice, Miss Fay Ann Holland, and stepped into a version of my life that had been waiting for me, patiently, for 11 years. The first-class cabin was unlike anything I had experienced, which I say not to impress you, but because the contrast matters to the story. I had flown coach my entire life, the middle seat when I booked late, the window when I planned ahead. I knew how to sleep in a seat that didn't recline, and how to eat an airport sandwich standing up because there were no chairs near the gate. The life I had lived had been constructed almost entirely of careful accommodations, of making small spaces work. The seat they showed me to on that flight was wider than the armchair in my living room. There was a footrest. There was a menu. The flight attendant who came to take my order, "Ms. Holland, may I bring you something to drink before we depart?" said my name, as though she had been told to expect me specifically, which I realized she probably had. I ordered sparkling water. I didn't order the champagne, not because I was afraid of it, but because I wanted to be entirely clear-headed for what came next. For 11 hours over the Atlantic, I thought. I thought about the nature of what my grandfather had built, not just financially, but architecturally. He had constructed a secret that was also a gift that was also a test that was also preparation. He had watched me for 26 years, watched me more carefully than anyone else in my family. And he had decided at some point before I was old enough to drive a car that I was worth preparing, that there was something in me that warranted an 11-year investment of attention and care and legal ingenuity. He had not told me. He had trusted me enough to wait. That, I understood, as the French coastline appeared beneath the clouds in the pale morning light, was its own kind of love, not the easy kind, the kind that believes in you enough to let you be tested, I pressed my face to the oval window and watched the Mediterranean appear, first as a glimmer, then as a color, the specific blue of it, a blue that exists nowhere on land, a blue that looks like something a painter invented to prove that the real world could be more beautiful than imagination. And I thought, I am going to handle this well. I don't know yet what handling it well looks like, but I am going to find out. The wheels touched down in Nice. The flight attendant said, "Welcome to France, Ms. Holland." I gathered my bag, which held 3 dresses, a pair of good shoes, and a white envelope containing a bank statement I had read 11 times. I walked through customs and into the arrivals hall. A man in a black suit was holding a sign that read, "Miss Faye Ann Holland, Holland Legacy Trust Beneficiary." Not just my name, the full thing, public and formal and real. I walked toward him on legs that felt entirely steady, which surprised me and then didn't. I have been preparing for this for 26 years, I thought. I just didn't know it. The black Mercedes pulled away from the curb and headed toward Monaco, and I watched the sea out the window all the way there, and I let it be exactly as beautiful as it was. The driver's name was Raymond, and he had been working for Ashworth and Weld clients for 9 years. He told me this in the easy, informational way of a man who understood that the people he transported were often arriving somewhere new and appreciated small anchors of context. He did not ask me questions. He pointed out landmarks as we drove. The Promenade des Anglais in Nice, the first glimpse of the Monaco coastline as the highway curved west, the way the principality announced itself gradually, like a sentence that builds before it lands. "The harbor first," he said. "Always the harbor." He was right. The harbor came into view before anything else. A crescent of calm water packed so densely with white yachts that from a distance it looked like a field of enormous flowers, each one worth more than the building I had lived in for 4 years. Beyond the harbor, the city rose in layers up the rocky hillside. Cream and ochre buildings stacked against the cliff face, terraces and balconies catching the afternoon light, the whole thing presided over by the old palace at the top like a punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very opulent sentence. I had seen photographs. The photographs had not been adequate. "First time?" Raymond asked. "Yes." "It gets easier to look at," he said, "but it never gets ordinary. The people who have been coming here 40 years still look out the window." We drove along the coastal road and then up through winding streets lined with boutiques whose window displays contained single items, a bag, a watch, a length of silk, presented with the reverence usually reserved for museum pieces. We passed the Casino de Monte Carlo, its ornate Belle Epoque facade glowing in the afternoon sun, like something that had been built specifically to make you feel that your own existence had been underfunded. Then we turned onto a quieter street and climbed a little further, and the car slowed before a building that was not grand in the showy way of the casino. It was grand in the older, quieter way of something that has been exactly what it is for a very long time, and has never needed to announce it. A stone facade, dark green shutters, a small brass plaque beside the door that read, "Ashworth and Weld Private Wealth Management, by appointment." Raymond opened my door. "Mr. Ashworth is expecting you on the 2nd floor. The receptionist will show you up." I stepped out onto the cobblestones. The air in Monaco smelled different from Portland. It smelled of salt and something warm and faintly floral. Jasmine, maybe, from somewhere I couldn't see. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk with my bag over my shoulder, a woman in a dress she had bought on sale 2 seasons ago, about to walk into a building that managed her $900 million trust. I thought of something Grandpa Walter had said to me once, during a chess game when I was maybe 16 years old. I had been nervous about a move. I had seen what I thought was the right play, but doubted myself at the last second. He had watched me hesitate and said, "Faye, the doubt is not the problem. The doubt means you're thinking. The problem is when the doubt starts thinking for you." I picked up my bag and walked inside. Elliot Ashworth was 58 years old and looked like a man who had spent his career in rooms where very large sums of money were discussed in very quiet voices. He was lean, well-dressed without being showy, with the kind of steady eyes that convey competence more effectively than any credential. He came around his desk when I entered and shook my hand with a firmness that communicated respect. Not the performative respect of someone trying to make me feel comfortable, but the real kind, the kind extended to an equal. "Miss Holland," he said, "welcome to Monaco. Please sit down." The office was on the 2nd floor, and the window behind his desk looked out over the harbor. I could see 3 yachts from where I sat, and beyond them, the open sea, and beyond that, the particular blue that had appeared beneath the plane's window that morning. I made a note to stop being surprised by beautiful views. I suspected I was going to be encountering more of them. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, I said, by understanding the full picture, not just the numbers, the structure, how it works. Ashworth nodded, and I could see that this pleased him. Not in a condescending way, not the pleasure of a teacher whose student has said something promising, but the pleasure of a professional who has finally been given permission to do his job properly. Then let me show you everything, he said. He opened a large leather portfolio on the desk between us. Inside were tab sections, each one thick with documents. He did not begin with the largest numbers. He began with the history. The Holland Legacy Trust had been created in a single afternoon 11 years ago when Walter Holland had arrived in Geneva with a handwritten list of instructions and a clarity of purpose that Ashworth described as unlike anything I had seen in 30 years of practice. My grandfather had known exactly what he wanted and why he wanted it. He had also known, with a specificity that Ashworth clearly found remarkable even now, exactly how he wanted it structured to protect it from being contested, compromised, or absorbed into the broader Holland family estate. He was meticulous, Ashworth said, every contingency addressed, every scenario considered. I have worked with some of the wealthiest families in Europe, Miss Holland. I have rarely seen an individual who understood trust architecture as instinctively as your grandfather did. He built a shipping company, I said. You learn to think about structure. That is exactly what he said. We spent 2 hours going through the assets. I want to explain them to you clearly because they matter to the story, and I want you to understand what Grandpa Walter had been building, quietly, internationally, over decades, while the family he left behind went about their ordinary lives. The first major asset was a 60% controlling interest in the Monte Carlo Bay Resort and Spa, a 280-room luxury property a few kilometers from where I was currently sitting. The resort had been acquired by the trust 7 years ago, and in that time, under Ashworth's management and with operational guidance from a director named James Holloway, it had grown its average occupancy rate from 71% to 89%, and its annual net operating income to approximately $18 million. The second major asset was a 51% controlling interest, held through a Delaware-based holding company in the Harlan Grand, a 38-floor resort and casino on the Las Vegas Strip. This was the trust's most significant single asset in terms of revenue. The property generated approximately $95 million in net income annually. It was managed by a director named Dana Reeves, who had been in the role for 7 years and by all accounts was exceptional at it. The third category was commercial real estate. 2 office buildings in London's Canary Wharf district held on long leases to financial services tenants, and a mixed-use commercial complex in Sydney's central business district. Combined annual rental income, approximately $12 million. The fourth was the investment portfolio, a diversified mix of equities, fixed income instruments, and alternative investments managed by a separate team within Ashworth and Weld. Current value, approximately $140 million. Total net asset value of the trust, $892 million as of the most recent quarterly valuation. I sat with this for a moment. I want to ask you something, I said. Of course. The statement I received, the one in the envelope, showed $312 million. That's just the liquid portfolio? Correct. The real property and business interests are carried at appraised value, which is a separate figure. So when my grandfather left my father a company worth $28 million and left me an envelope, I said carefully, he was leaving me a trust worth nearly $900 million. Yes, and he chose to do it this way, specifically. Very specifically. Ashworth folded his hands on the portfolio. He left instructions about this. He anticipated that you might want to understand the reasoning. He reached into the back of the portfolio and produced a sealed envelope. Not the white business envelope from the will reading. This was cream-colored, heavy, the size of a personal letter. My name was on the front in the same handwriting as everything else. He asked that I give you this after our first meeting, Ashworth said. Not before. He wanted you to understand the numbers first, so that when you read his words, they would mean what he intended them to mean. I took the envelope. I did not open it there. I don't know entirely why, except that it felt like something that needed privacy, the way certain conversations can only happen alone. One more question, I said. Yes. Why didn't I know? I understand the legal structure, the P.O. box, the confidentiality clause, but 11 years is a long time. You managed this trust for 11 years without a single thing slipping through. Ashworth was quiet for a moment, and in that pause I understood that the answer had more layers than a simple legal explanation. Your grandfather was very thorough, he said finally, but I think the more honest answer is this. No one in your family thought to look. The people who might have stumbled across something, your father, your mother, they were not looking for evidence that Walter had resources they didn't know about because they believed they already knew everything about Walter that mattered. That belief protected the secret more effectively than any legal mechanism. I thought about this on the way to the hotel that I owned 60% of, which was still a sentence my brain was having difficulty processing naturally. The people who weren't looking. I had spent 26 years in a family of people who were not looking at me, and that had protected me too, in a way I was only beginning to understand. My room at the Monte Carlo Bay was called the Garden Suite. It had a private terrace that faced the sea, a bathroom with a freestanding soaking tub positioned near a window so that you could lie in the water and look at the Mediterranean, and a sitting room with bookshelves that held actual books, not decorative books, real ones, the kind with cracked spines. I checked. I ordered dinner from room service, which arrived on a rolling table with a white cloth and a small vase holding a single freesia. I ate sea bass and a salad of things I didn't entirely recognize, and a lemon tart that was so perfectly made it seemed almost rude to eat it. I drank a glass of wine from the Rhone Valley and looked at the lights on the water and tried to feel the size of what had happened. Then I opened my grandfather's letter. It was 3 pages, handwritten, dated from 8 months before he died. I'm not going to reproduce it here word for word. Those words belong to me and to him, but I will tell you what it said because it is the center of the story. It is the thing everything else radiates from. He began by saying that he had been thinking about how to explain this for years and had decided that the only honest way was to start with a question. Did you ever wonder why I asked you so many questions? He wrote about the chess games, not just as chess games, but as what they actually were. Structured opportunities to observe the way I thought, the way I evaluated competing priorities, the way I handled being wrong. He had been watching, for 18 years of chess games, the specific quality of my mind. He wrote about the business conversations. He listed them, not all of them, but enough that I could see the pattern I had missed completely. Every question about hotel management, every hypothetical about shipping logistics, every scenario about customer experience and market positioning, he had not been making conversation. He had been conducting a long, patient, informal education. And more than that, he had been using my answers. Every major operational decision I made for the Monaco property in the last 6 years, he wrote, was filtered through a question I first heard from you. You told me once, when you were 19, that the difference between a hotel that feels luxurious and one that merely looks luxurious is whether the staff seem genuinely glad you're there. I rewrote the hiring criteria for the Monaco property based on that sentence. Occupancy increased 11% the following year. I had to stop reading for a moment. I had been 19. I had been sitting across from him at his kitchen table eating a piece of his wife's apple cake, which he had continued making from her recipe for 11 years after she died, and I had been just talking the way I always talked with him, about things that interested me, about the world and how it worked, and he had been writing it down. He had been writing it down. You are not inheriting my empire, he wrote toward the end. You built it with me, without knowing you were doing it. I structured the trust the way I did because I needed you to spend 26 years becoming the person who could run what you had already helped create. I needed the world to underestimate you, including your family, so that you would learn to trust your own judgment without requiring anyone else's confirmation. The envelope was not an insult. It was the last lesson. I needed to see, and I needed you to see, who the people around you really were before you had the power to change the dynamic. Wealth changes everything about how people see you. I needed you to see them first. Go home when you're ready, take your time, look at the whole board. I love you more than these pages can hold. Grandpa Walter. I sat on the terrace of the Garden Suite in the Monte Carlo Bay Resort, which I owned 60% of, in Monaco, which I had never visited before, in the dark, with the sea making its quiet, steady sound below me and the lights of the harbor scattered across the water like a second sky. And I cried. Not the polite kind of crying, not the managed kind, the deep kind, the kind that comes from somewhere below the chest, the kind that is grief and gratitude and love all moving at the same time in the same direction. I cried for my grandfather, who had seen me when no one else had bothered to look, and when I was finished, I wiped my face, poured the last inch of the Rhone Valley wine into the glass, and sat looking at the sea with the quiet, settled feeling of someone who has just received the most important piece of information of their life and knows, without any doubt, what to do with it. The next morning, James Holloway, the resort director, gave me a tour of the Monte Carlo Bay. He was 45, originally from Boston, with an operations manager's brain and a hospitality professional's warmth. He had been told I was the trust's beneficiary conducting a familiarization visit. He had not been told I was the owner. I was glad of this. I wanted to see the property the way it actually was, not the way people show things when they know the person looking can fire them. James showed me everything. The guest rooms and the suites, the 5 restaurants, from the casual terrace cafe to the signature dining room where a French chef with 2 Michelin stars produced food that was, as far as I could determine, genuinely worth the price. The spa, which was built around a natural saltwater pool and smelled of eucalyptus and something warm and indefinable. The small casino, nothing like Las Vegas, more like a drawing room where adults came to play at moderate stakes and drink excellent whiskey. We ended on the presidential suites terrace, looking down at the harbor and the sea beyond it. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 6 years. I came from a property in Dubai. What made you stay? He thought about this. The ownership, he said, which sounds like an odd thing to say, but the trust has always been a hands-off owner in the best way. They don't interfere with operations, but every quarter I get a memo with questions, very specific questions. Things like, he smiled slightly, are guests waiting more than 90 seconds for elevator service during peak check-in hours? And if so, what are the bottleneck points? Or, does the breakfast menu currently offer enough options for guests with common dietary restrictions? And are those options presented attractively or as afterthoughts? The questions always come from the same place, from a genuine curiosity about the actual guest experience, not just the financial metrics. Who sent the questions? Mr. Holland, for the first 5 years, then his team. They always said they were passing along feedback from the trust's principals. Principals, plural. The memo stopped about a year ago, James said. We assumed it was because of Mr. Holland's health. I hope, he paused. Whoever takes over the relationship, I hope they keep the questions coming. We've done more good work responding to those memos than we have from any formal strategic review. I looked out at the harbor. I thought about a 19-year-old girl at a kitchen table in Portland eating apple cake and talking about what makes a place feel genuinely welcoming, and a 91-year-old man writing it down in a small notebook. The questions will keep coming, I said. James looked at me. You know the principals? I am the principal, I said, as of last month. There was a pause. James Holloway, 6-year director of the Monte Carlo Bay Resort, looked at me with an expression that moved through several stages before settling on something that was, I thought, respect. Then, he said, with a slight bow of his head, welcome to your property, Miss Holland. I flew to Las Vegas 3 days later on a commercial flight I booked myself. I was not ready for the full implications of what company jet meant when applied to my own situation, and I felt it was important to take that adjustment slowly. Dana Reeves met me at the airport. She was 42, Nevada-born, with close-cropped natural hair and the kind of direct eye contact that immediately communicates that this is someone who does not waste your time or her own. She shook my hand at baggage claim without ceremony and said, "The car is this way. I have 2 hours of operational overview prepared, but I also made dinner reservations because I find that people process large amounts of information better with food in front of them. Which would you prefer to start with?" "Dinner," I said, and then the overview. She smiled. Good answer. The Harlan Grand announced itself the way Las Vegas announces everything, with scale and light, with the unapologetic commitment to impressiveness. That is the city's defining personality. 38 floors of glass and steel rose from the strip in a form that managed to be both monumental and somehow elegant, which I suspected was the result of someone having spent a great deal of money on an architect who genuinely knew what they were doing. Your grandfather bought the site 19 years ago. Dana said as we pulled up to the main entrance. The building went up over 3 years. He opened it himself, came out for the ribbon cutting, stayed for a week, learned everything he could about the operation, went home, and never came back in person. But he was here every week in every way that mattered. The memos, I said. Dana looked at me sideways. James called ahead, she said. Yes, the memos. He was the best absentee owner I have ever worked for, and I've worked for some good ones. The Harlan Grand's numbers, when Dana laid them out over dinner in the resort's private dining room, were of a different order than Monaco. The property had 914 hotel rooms, 6 restaurants, a spa complex that occupied the entire 14th floor, a casino floor of 80,000 square feet that generated, in an average year, between $80 and $110 million in gross gaming revenue, with net income of approximately $60 to $65 million after expenses. The remaining $30 to $35 million in net income came from the non-gaming amenities. Total annual net income in the most recent fiscal year, $96 million. I ate my dinner carefully and asked questions, and I noticed Dana noticing the quality of my questions, the way you notice, without necessarily commenting on it, when someone demonstrates an understanding of your field that you did not anticipate. Can I ask, she said, at some point between the main course and dessert, what your background is? Before the trust, I mean. What did you do? I taught 3rd grade. Dana set down her fork, looked at me, then picked her fork back up. Huh, she said, which was not a dismissal. It was the sound of a sophisticated person revising an assumption. My grandfather believed, I said, that the best business decisions come from understanding what ordinary people actually want. Not what they say they want in a focus group, what they actually want when they walk into a place and try to decide whether they feel welcomed or tolerated. That is, Dana said, a surprisingly precise description of what separates the good hospitality operations from the great ones. I know, I helped come up with it. She raised her glass. Then here's to the new principal, she said. I think we're going to work well together. I spent 4 days in Las Vegas. I met the heads of each operational division: finance, casino, hotel, food and beverage, entertainment, facilities. I sat in on a morning management meeting. I walked the casino floor at 2 p.m. and at 11 at night, which are very different things, and I ate at 3 of the 6 restaurants and made notes about what worked and what didn't. On my last afternoon, I met Robert Finch, the lead financial advisor on the trust account, who had flown in from New York specifically to meet me, in a conference room on the 42nd floor that looked out over the desert in all 4 directions, the city laid out below us like a circuit board that someone had sprinkled with neon. Finch was 60, methodical, with the quiet confidence of someone who has managed large sums of money for long enough to be unimpressed by large sums of money. He gave me a complete picture of the trust's financial structure, explained the tax architecture, described the succession of management decisions that had grown the portfolio from its initial value at founding to its current position. Your grandfather left very specific instructions, Finch said, about what to do once you took control. He described it as, and I'm quoting here, the opening of the endgame. He said endgame. He was a chess player. I know. Finch slid a folder across the table. He also asked us to prepare the financial analysis of Holland Maritime, your father's company, as soon as you activated the trust. He anticipated that you might want to understand its situation. I had been about to ask for exactly this. I opened the folder. The report was 41 pages. I spent the next 2 hours reading it carefully while Finch sat across from me with his own coffee and his own notes and did not hurry me. Holland Maritime's situation was, as the report summarized on its executive page, financially stressed but operationally sound, with immediate risks that are manageable but will become acute within 6 to 9 months without either a capital infusion or a significant restructuring of existing debt obligations. The specifics were detailed. The fleet expansion from the prior year, 4 new vessels, financed primarily through variable rate commercial loans, had been well-intentioned and strategically sensible in the long term, but had created a near-term cash flow strain that my father was managing month to month. The operating business was profitable. The debt service was not sustainable at current revenue levels without growth, and growth was uncertain because 2 clients represented 67% of revenue, creating a concentration risk that a single contract loss could activate catastrophically. I read the page on the two major clients twice. One of them, the larger of the two, representing 41% of total revenue, had recently been acquired by a national logistics conglomerate. The transition was ongoing. It was not certain that Holland Maritime's contract would survive the acquirer's vendor review, which was scheduled for the following spring. If that contract was lost, Holland Maritime would need to either raise capital, refinance its debt on terms it might not qualify for, or begin selling assets, starting with the vessels that had caused the problem in the first place. My father did not know this, or rather, he knew the situation in the way that people know things they have decided not to look at directly. He knew the outlines, the broad shape of the risk, but he had not commissioned the analysis that would have shown him exactly how exposed he was, because commissioning that analysis would have required him to confront the answer. I closed the folder. How long would it take, I asked, to structure an acquisition offer for Holland Maritime, a legitimate, arm's-length transaction through a new holding entity with no visible connection to the trust? Finch looked at me. That depends on how you want to structure it. I want it structured properly. Full due diligence, independent audit, clean documentation. I am not in a hurry. I want it done right. Then, Finch said, I would estimate 6 to 8 weeks from the decision to move forward to a formal offer being presented. We would need to establish a new Delaware LLC, conduct the third-party audit, prepare the offer documents. It is not a complicated transaction in scale, but it should be done with the same rigor as any acquisition. 6 to 8 weeks, I said, minimum, to do it properly. Start the process, I said. I'll fly home at the end of the week. I want the offer ready before the spring vendor review. Finch wrote a note. What do you want to call the holding company? I thought for a moment. Meridian Logistics Group? He wrote it down. And the offer price? Fair value plus a premium that makes it impossible to refuse without being irrational. The goal is not to take advantage of a distressed seller. The goal is to solve a real problem while making a sound investment. Finch looked up from his notepad. Your grandfather, he said quietly, would have said exactly that. I know, I said. He taught me. I flew home to Portland on a Friday in late autumn. The leaves were almost entirely gone from the trees now. The maples and oaks along my street had given up their color and stood bare against a sky the color of old silver. I drove the Honda Civic from the airport to my apartment. I made tea. I sat at my small desk under the Georgia O'Keeffe print and looked at the familiar space around me. The off-white walls, the stack of unmarked papers from a substitute who had covered my class, the blue lunch bag hanging on the hook by the door. I had been gone 11 days. In those 11 days, I had seen my properties in Monaco and Las Vegas, met the people who ran them, read 41 pages of financial analysis about my father's company, and initiated a corporate acquisition process that would take 6 to 8 weeks to complete. I had not told a single member of my family any of this. I had a family dinner to attend the following evening. The dinner was at my parents' house, the same house I had grown up in. A substantial craftsman in one of Portland's better neighborhoods, comfortable in the way of a family that had always had enough without having more than enough. Trevor and Delia had lived there for 24 years. The kitchen still had the same white tile I remembered from childhood, and the dining table still sat 6, and the smell when you walked in the door was still coffee and whatever my mother had been cooking that afternoon. Everyone was there. Cole had driven up from where he was staying temporarily at a friend's place in Seattle. He had not yet decided what to do with the penthouse, but was enjoying the idea of it. Brooke and Greg had come down from their house in Lake Oswego. The mood was expansive and slightly unreal, the way it is when people are newly wealthy and haven't yet figured out how to hold the money in their normal lives without it changing the shape of everything. Trevor was at the head of the table, which he always was, talking about Holland Maritime with the energy of a man who had been given a new lease on something he loved. He was talking about expansion, 2 new vessels, additional routes, possibly a second office on the California coast. I listened. I had read the 41 pages. I understood what he did not. How's the cash flow looking with the expansion plans? I asked during a pause. Trevor looked at me with the slight surprise he always showed when I asked a direct business question. Not the look of a man who thought I was stupid, but the look of a man who had simply never put me in the category of person whose business opinions I consider. 2 different things, both worth noting. It's manageable, he said. The new revenue from the expanded routes will cover the debt service. What about the concentration risk? 2 clients representing most of the revenue. Is there a plan to diversify before one of them changes? The table had gone quiet. Where did you hear about the client concentration? Trevor asked. I didn't hear about it. It's standard risk analysis for any freight company. Grandpa talked about it. Trevor studied me for a moment. We're aware of the risk. We're working on business development. One of them was recently acquired, I said. The larger one. The acquirer's vendor review is in the spring. Trevor set down his fork. How do you know that? I read trade publications, I said, which was not entirely untrue. Faye, my mother's voice, measured. Let your father handle his business. Of course, I said, and I let it go, because I had not come to this table to reveal anything yet. I had come to look at the whole board. After dinner, helping clear dishes in the kitchen, my mother put her hand on my arm. You're doing it again, she said. Doing what? Asking questions that make your father feel like he's being interrogated. He's built that company for 30 years. He knows what he's doing. I looked at her. In the overhead kitchen light, my mother looked exactly like herself, competent, warm in her particular way, absolutely certain about the order of things. I know he does, I said. Then let him do it without the quiz. You're right, I said. Sorry. She patted my arm and went back to the table, and I stood at the sink for a moment, looking out the kitchen window into the dark backyard where I had played as a child, and thought, this is the last time I will stand at this sink and know more than everyone in this house and say nothing. Not because I was angry, because the time for saying nothing was almost over. 6 weeks passed. They were the strangest 6 weeks of my life, and also, in some ways, the most clarifying. I went to school, I taught fractions and spelling and the water cycle and how to write a sentence that says exactly what you mean. I packed my lunch in the blue bag, I drove the Honda Civic, I attended a family dinner and a cousin's gathering and a birthday lunch for my mother, at all of which I was exactly the Faye I had always been. The quiet one, the practical one, the one who helped with dishes and didn't say much about herself. And in the evenings, I sat at my small desk and worked. The Meridian Logistics Group, LLC, was registered in Delaware on a Tuesday morning. The third-party audit of Holland Maritime was completed by a respected Portland accounting firm hired through a blind intermediary. The offer documents were prepared by a transactional attorney in New York, whose firm regularly handled deals of this size, and who communicated with me as she would communicate with any client, precisely, professionally, without curiosity about why a woman who listed her occupation as trust beneficiary was acquiring a regional shipping company. The offer arrived on Trevor Holland's desk on a Wednesday morning, 7 weeks after I had sat across from Robert Finch in Las Vegas and said, "Start the process." Meridian Logistics Group, LLC, proposed to acquire 100% of Holland Maritime at a price of $42 million, payable in cash at closing. The terms included full retention of all current employees on existing contracts for a minimum of 3 years, continuation of current management structure with Trevor Holland remaining as CEO for an initial 2-year term at market compensation, and immediate full repayment of all outstanding company debt from Meridian's own resources. The offer was, by any objective measure, exceptional. It was 50% above book value. It solved every financial problem Holland Maritime had. It protected every person who worked there. And it came from a company that appeared, to anyone doing the standard research, to be a legitimate Delaware-based logistics investment firm with European backing and no visible connection to anyone named Holland. Trevor called me that evening. "Something unexpected happened today," he said. His voice was the voice of a man processing several things simultaneously. "Tell me," I said. "A company made an offer to buy Holland Maritime. Out of nowhere. Called Meridian Logistics Group. Swiss-backed, based in Delaware. That sounds serious," I said. "The offer is... it's very good. Too good, almost. $42 million, all cash, immediate debt repayment, keeps everyone employed." He paused. "I don't understand why they want us. We're not large enough to be strategically interesting to a European firm." "Maybe they see something you don't," I said carefully. "Regional relationships, fleet quality, the Pacific coast routes." "Maybe." Another pause. "Can you come to dinner Thursday? I want the whole family to hear this. You ask good questions." I looked at my reflection in the dark window above my desk. "Of course," I said. "I'll be there." Thursday's dinner was not like other family dinners. Trevor had cleared the dining table of everything except the offer documents, spread across the wood like a map of a decision he hadn't yet made. The family assembled, Cole, Brooke and Greg, Delia and me, and Trevor stood at the head of the table and presented the offer the way he presented things when he was serious, which was directly, with data first and emotion second. $42 million, Cole said immediately. Take it. It's not that simple, Trevor said. It's 30 years of your life, and it's $42 million, and you're 58 years old. What's complicated? What's complicated is that I've spent 30 years building this. If I sell it, what am I? Rich, Cole said. Brooke laughed. Greg looked at his watch. Delia, the company was your father's before it was yours, Trevor. It means something. That's exactly what I'm saying. I had been reading through the offer documents since I sat down. I had read them before, of course. I had directed their drafting, but I read them again now with the focused attention of someone trying to see them as what they genuinely were rather than what they knew them to be. The employee retention clause, I said, does it have a penalty mechanism or is it just a stated intention? Trevor found the page. There's a liquidated damages provision. If they terminate more than 15% of current staff within the first 3 years, Meridian owes a penalty calculated at 2 times the annual salary of each terminated employee. That's real protection. That's not a gesture. No, Trevor said, it's not. And the debt repayment, it says at closing. That means the company is clean before you hand over the keys. You're not selling a leveraged business. You're selling a clean one. Right. And you stay as CEO for 2 years, same role, market salary. Nothing changes operationally. According to the offer, yes. And I set the documents down. The table was looking at me with an attention I wasn't accustomed to from this group, and I was careful not to let anything show on my face that shouldn't be there. This isn't a hostile acquisition, I said. Whoever is behind Meridian wants Holland Maritime to keep running the way it runs. They want the relationships, the roots, the team, the reputation. They're paying a premium for continuity, not disruption. Trevor looked at me for a long moment. Your grandfather would have said the same thing, he said quietly. He taught me how to read an offer, I said. The conversation continued for another hour. By the end of it, I could see the decision forming in Trevor. Not because I pushed it, but because the offer was genuinely good and the financial situation of the company was genuinely precarious, and he was, at his core, a practical man who had built a business by making clear-eyed decisions even when they were difficult. I'm going to sleep on it, he said, but I think I have to say yes. You don't have to, I said. It has to feel right. It feels right, he said. It just doesn't feel good. Those are different things, I said, and you know how to do things that don't feel good. He looked at me. When did you get so wise? I almost told him. I was so close to telling him right then. It rose in me like water, the whole story, the envelope in Monaco and the 41 pages and the 6 weeks of careful preparation, everything. But the board wasn't ready. There were still pieces in motion. Good night, Dad, I said, and helped my mother carry the glasses to the kitchen. The following Friday at 4:47 in the afternoon, Trevor Holland signed the acquisition documents in the offices of Meridian Logistics Group's Portland-based attorney. At 5:15, he called me to tell me it was done. I sold the company, he said. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before. Not grief, not relief, but the sound of a man standing at the edge of a new and uncertain geography, looking at the view. How do you feel? I asked. Like I just made the smartest decision of my career, he said, and like I'm going to miss it every day. You're still CEO, I said. Nothing changes Monday morning. I know, it's still different. Yes, I said, it is. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment for a long time. At 5:30, I received a confirmation email from the Meridian Logistics Group's registered agent. Holland Maritime was now a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Logistics Group, LLC, which was a wholly owned subsidiary of Holland Legacy Trust. My father had just sold me his company. I did not celebrate. I did not feel victorious. I felt the weight of what I had done, the size of it, the complexity of it, the way it was both entirely right and entirely unresolved. I had protected the company. I had protected the employees. I had solved a financial crisis my father did not fully know he was facing. I had done all of this in the way my grandfather had taught me to do things, strategically, carefully, several moves ahead. But my family did not know, and they were going to find out. I called Patricia Wells on the following Monday. Patricia was Portland's most respected luxury real estate broker, a woman in her mid-50s with iron gray hair and the focused intelligence of someone who had spent 25 years matching people to properties at price points where every detail mattered. I had researched her before calling because I researched everything now, and her client reviews described her as direct, discreet, and incapable of wasting anyone's time. "I'm looking for residential property," I said when she answered. "I'd like to start with anything between 12 and 18 million, Portland metropolitan area. I'm interested in privacy, views, and space. I'm not interested in being close to neighbors." There was a brief pause on Patricia's end, the pause of a person recalibrating rapidly. "May I ask what line of work you're in, Ms. Holland?" "Trust management and investment," I said. "I recently took over a family portfolio." "I see. And the purchase. This would be a primary residence?" "Yes, I'm planning to stay in Portland long term." "All right," Patricia said, and I could hear her shifting into the focused, efficient mode of someone who has decided you are a serious client. "I have several properties that may interest you. I'll pull together a viewing schedule for next week." "That would be good," I said. "I'm not in a hurry. I want to see everything in range and make the right decision." Over the following 2 weeks, which is the actual timeline for how these things are done responsibly, I viewed 6 properties. A contemporary compound in the West Hills with an indoor pool and a guest house that could have comfortably housed my entire apartment. A mid-century estate in Lake Oswego that had been tastefully updated and sat on 3 acres of mature landscaping. A farmhouse-style property outside Beaverton that was beautiful but too rural for what I had in mind. And then Patricia showed me Kensington Estate. It was 18 acres in the hills southeast of Portland at an elevation that gave it an unobstructed view of the city from the main house's west-facing rooms. The house itself was a 4,000 square foot craftsman-style structure that had been extensively renovated by the previous owners. Wide plank oak floors, a kitchen that managed to be both professional grade and genuinely warm, a library with built-in shelving floor to ceiling, and a wood-burning fireplace. The main bedroom's west wall was largely glass, and from the bed you could see Portland spread across the valley below, the lights of the city beginning to appear in the early evening like something being gradually revealed. From the main bedroom window, if you knew where to look, you could see the roofline of my parents' neighborhood. I stood at that window for a long time. "The asking price is $16 million, Patricia said. "The sellers are motivated. They've relocated to the East Coast. There's no other active interest." "I'll make an offer," I said. "Full asking price, all cash. I'll need my attorneys to prepare the purchase agreement, and I'll need the standard inspection and title review periods. I'm not going to skip due diligence." Patricia looked at me with the expression of someone who has been in real estate for 25 years and understands that the moments that feel most surreal are often the most real. "Of course," she said. "I'll prepare the paperwork." And the full transaction, from offer acceptance through inspection, title clearance, wire transfer, and closing, took 6 weeks, which is the appropriate amount of time for a cash purchase of this size when done with proper legal oversight and full compliance with all applicable financial regulations. Finch's team coordinated the transfer through the Trust's U.S. banking relationships, with full documentation provided to the title company and the receiving financial institution. There was no shortcut taken. There was no magic involved. I moved in on a Saturday morning in early December, when the first light frost had appeared on the grass of the estate and the air smelled of winter coming. I hired a moving company and moved my belongings from the apartment, which were not many. The Georgia O'Keeffe print, my books, my clothes, my grandmother's quilt, the blue lunch bag that I kept because it had been with me through the most important year of my life, and I was not ready to be without it yet. When the movers had finished, I stood in the library of Kensington Estate, surrounded by empty shelves that I would fill slowly, over time, with the books I was going to read in the life I was about to live. Then I called my mother. "I'm moving today," I said. "Would you and Dad like to come see the new place?" "Oh, that's nice, honey. New apartment?" "Something like that. I'll text you the address." I sent the address. Then I stood in the foyer and waited. I heard my father's car on the gravel before I saw it. They came up the driveway slowly, the way people drive when they're not sure what they're looking at, and stopped behind the moving company's truck, which was just pulling away. I watched from the tall foyer window as they sat in the car for a moment, not moving. Then they got out. They stood on the circular driveway looking at the house. My father's face was doing the thing it did when he was processing information that contradicted his existing model of something. My mother had her hand on his arm. I opened the front door before they reached it. "Hi," I said. "Come in." They stepped inside. The foyer was double height with a chandelier, not an ostentatious one, a simple one, well made, that cast a warm light on the oak floors. The staircase curved gently to the upper level. Ahead of them, through the arched opening, was the living room with its tall windows and the Portland skyline beyond. My father turned slowly in place. "Faye," his voice was careful. "What is this?" "This is my house," I said. "How much?" $16 million, cash purchase, closed last week. The silence was very complete. "That's not possible," my mother said, not unkindly. She said it the way you say something is not possible when you genuinely believe the laws of reality preclude it. "I know it seems that way," I said. "Sit down. I'll make tea, and I'll explain everything." I made tea in the kitchen. The imported Italian marble countertops, the 6-burner range, the view of the frost-covered garden through the window above the sink, and I carried 3 cups to the living room where my parents sat side by side on the sofa, looking at the city through the tall glass. And I told them. I told them about the envelope, about the 3 items inside it, about the late-night phone call to Geneva and Elliot Ashworth's measured voice saying, "We've been waiting for your call," about Monaco and the garden suite and the harbor and James Holloway and the letter Grandpa Walter had left me. Not its private words, those belonged only to me, but its essential meaning. About Las Vegas and Dana Reeves and $96 million in annual net income. About the 41 pages on Holland Maritime and the 6-week acquisition process, and the Friday afternoon signature and the email confirmation at 5:30. I told them all of it, steadily, without drama, the way you explain something that is true and complicated and deserves to be heard clearly. When I finished, the tea had gone cold. My father said, "Meridian Logistics." "Yes." "That's yours." "Yes." "You bought my company." I bought a company with serious financial vulnerabilities from a willing seller at a price 50% above book value, with contractual protections for every employee and a management continuation agreement that keeps you in your role. "Yes." Trevor stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to us, looking at the city. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was quiet, and in the quiet of it was something I had not expected. Not anger, but a specific kind of hurt. The hurt of a father who has just understood something large about his relationship with his daughter and is not sure yet what to do with the understanding. "Because if I had told you," I said, "you would have refused. Not because the offer was bad. It's a good offer, and you know it. But because accepting help from your daughter would have felt like conceding something you've never been willing to concede." A long pause. "That's true," he said. "I know. I've been paying attention." He turned from the window. His face was open in a way I had not seen before. Not the composed, forward-leaning face of Trevor Holland, the businessman, but the face of a man who is standing in unfamiliar territory and is honest enough to admit it. "Your grandfather," he said. "Yes. He planned this." All of it. Trevor sat back down beside my mother, who had been silent through all of this with the silence of a woman rapidly rebuilding her understanding of her own family from the ground up. "Faye," she said, "I said some things, at the will reading, and after." "I know." Mom," I looked at her. "I know. We can talk about all of it. There's time. But right now, I just need you to know that I'm the same person I was 3 months ago. I'm just in a house that fits who I actually am." Delia looked around the room, the high ceilings, the well-made chandelier, the city through the glass. And for a moment, I saw in her face something I had very rarely seen there, genuine uncertainty. The uncertainty of a woman who has been confident about the shape of her family for 30 years and has just discovered the shape was different than she thought. "Tell me what to do," she said. "Have tea," I said, "and look at the view. And then, when you're ready, tell me what you actually think." She picked up her tea. Outside, Portland was going blue and gold in the December light, the city stretching from horizon to horizon, $312 million of liquid assets and a nearly $900 million trust, and a $16 million house on a hill and a shipping company and 2 resorts and commercial real estate in 3 countries and all the rest of it. And me, 26 years old, in a room that for the first time in my life was exactly the right size. This, I thought, is what my grandfather was building. Not the money. This. The days after my parents left Kensington Estate were quiet in the way that follows something large. The way the air feels after a storm has moved through, altered and still, and carrying the smell of everything that just happened. I did not hear from my father for 4 days. I did not call him either. I understood, without needing it explained, that Trevor Holland required time to move through the particular territory he had entered in my living room, the territory of a man revising a belief he had held for 26 years about the order of things in his own family. That kind of revision does not happen in an afternoon. It happens in the private hours, in the middle of the night, in the shower, on the drive to work, in all the small recurring spaces where the mind returns to something unresolved and turns it over again. I used the quiet to work. I had a standing morning call with Robert Finch in New York, during which we reviewed trust operations, discussed the London and Sydney portfolios, and tracked the progress of several smaller investment decisions that Finch's team had been managing before my activation and were now transitioning to my direct oversight. I had a weekly video call with James Holloway in Monaco, who was beginning to understand that the new principal asked different questions than the previous one. More operational, more granular, more interested in the experience of a specific guest on a specific Tuesday than in the average of a quarterly trend. I had a bi-weekly call with Dana Reeves in Las Vegas, which usually ran long because Dana was the kind of person whose thinking expanded in conversation, and we had quickly discovered that we thought well together. I also began, in those December weeks, to learn something I had not anticipated, that managing wealth is not primarily about money. It is about decisions. An unending sequence of decisions, each one requiring information, judgment, and a willingness to be wrong and correct course. The money is the material. The decisions are the work. Grandpa Walter had known this. It was in every chess game, every hypothetical, every kitchen table conversation about what makes a business genuinely good at what it does. He had been teaching me to make decisions for 18 years. The trust was simply the arena where those decisions would now matter at a different scale. I had a lot to learn. I knew this clearly, without anxiety. There was something almost peaceful about the size of what I didn't yet know. It meant there was a great deal ahead of me, which is a different thing entirely from feeling behind. Cole called on a Wednesday evening, 12 days after the scene at Kensington Estate. I was in the library reading a book about the history of the Las Vegas Strip that Dana had recommended. She had said, "You can't manage a property like the Harlan Grand without understanding what the Strip is and where it came from." When my phone lit up with his name, I answered. "Is it true?" he said, without preamble. "Which part?" "All of it. The trust, the house, Dad's company." A pause. "Are you actually—" Mom said a number, and I've been sitting here for a week trying to make it make sense. "What number did she say?" "She said nearly 900 million. That's accurate as of the last quarterly valuation." The silence on Cole's end was the silence of someone who is holding a piece of information that doesn't fit in any available space. "Faye." "Yes." "How long have you known?" "Since the day of the will reading." I opened the envelope in the elevator. Another silence, longer this time. "And you didn't say anything?" "No." "Why?" I set the book down. Outside the library window, the December night was clear and cold and very dark. The city lights spread across the valley below like a map of all the lives being lived simultaneously down there, each one as complicated and real as mine. "Because I needed to know who everyone was," I said, "before everyone knew what I had." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "That's actually really smart. Grandpa taught me. He taught you a lot of things he didn't teach the rest of us. He taught me the things I was interested in learning. You were never interested in chess." "I was never interested in sitting still for 2 hours," Cole said, and there was something in his voice when he said it. Not defensiveness, but a kind of honest self-accounting that I had not heard from him before. I've been thinking about that, about what I'm actually interested in, versus what I've just been coasting on. What have you been thinking? I've been thinking that I'm 30 years old and I don't actually know what I'm good at because I've never had to find out. Everything I have came from being a Holland. The name, the connections, Grandpa's money at the edges of things, Dad smoothing the way. He paused. "That's a weird thing to realize about yourself." "It's a useful thing to realize," I said. "Yeah." A breath. "Look. I'm not calling to ask you for anything. I want to be clear about that. I'm not—" "Cole, What? I know you're not calling to ask for something. You called because you're trying to figure out what to do with what you just found out about your family. That's a different thing. A pause. Yeah, he said again, more quietly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Come to Portland when you're ready, not to talk about money, just to talk. Okay, he said. I will. We said goodnight. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after the call ended, looking at the empty bookshelves that still waited to be filled. My brother was 30 years old and had just done something genuinely difficult. He had looked at himself clearly. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, quite a lot. Brooke called 2 days after Cole. Her call was different. Brooke was always precise, always purposeful. She did not make calls without knowing what she intended to achieve, which was a quality I had always respected even when it was directed at objectives I found hollow. She apologized, and her apology was well constructed and specific, which told me she had prepared it. She cited 2 specific incidents from the will reading, the comment about things being appropriate to my station, and a remark she had made at a family dinner 3 years earlier about my job that I had not forgotten, and apparently neither had she. I accepted the apology. I meant it when I said I did. But I also held on to something Elliot Ashworth had said in Monaco about the people who hadn't been looking, the observation that the most effective protection for a secret is the belief of the people around you that they already know everything that matters. Brooke had not been looking at me because she had decided long ago what I was. The apology was real. What it could not do was reconstruct the years during which she had not looked. That was all right. Not every relationship needs to be reconstructed. Some just need to be understood accurately, which is its own kind of resolution. I told her I appreciated her calling. I told her I hoped we could have a genuinely good relationship going forward. I meant that too. After I hung up, I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee and stood at the window looking at the garden in the December light, and I thought about the difference between forgiveness and trust. Forgiveness is a decision you make about the past. Trust is something you build in the present, slowly, on the evidence of consistent behavior over time. I had forgiven my family, or I was in the process of it, which is how forgiveness actually works, not in a single moment, but in a series of small, ongoing choices. Trust was a separate project with its own timeline and its own standards of evidence. I was patient. I had been playing chess since I was 8 years old. My father came on a Thursday afternoon, 17 days after the scene in the living room. He came alone. He called ahead, which he had not done when they first came to see the house, and he arrived at exactly the time he said he would, which was a form of respect I noted. I opened the door before he knocked. He came in. He looked around the foyer differently this time, not with the stunned disorientation of first impact, but with the steadier gaze of a man who had processed the fact of the house and was now looking at it as simply a place where his daughter lived. Nice light in the afternoon, he said. The west exposure. I chose it partly for that. Good choice. We went to the kitchen. I made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, not the living room, not the formal spaces, but the kitchen, which is where the real conversations in my family had always happened, if they happened at all. Trevor wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked at the table for a moment before he looked at me. I owe you an apology, he said. For what specifically? He looked up. I could see him choosing precision over generality, which cost him something. For the will reading, I didn't laugh, but I didn't say anything either, and that's worse in some ways. You were sitting there, and your grandfather had just... And everyone was... He stopped. I should have said something. I didn't, and that's been sitting with me. It has been sitting with me too, I said. I know. He turned the mug in his hands. I've been thinking about why I didn't say anything, and I think the honest answer is that I had gotten so used to not paying attention to you, to putting you in a category and leaving you there, that it didn't even occur to me to speak up, not because I didn't care, because I had stopped looking. He shook his head slightly. Your grandfather would be furious with me. He would, I said, but he also left you the company you spent 30 years building, which means he understood that you were a good man with a blind spot. He didn't give up on you. He just protected me from the blind spot until I didn't need protection anymore. Trevor was quiet for a long time. The company, he said finally. Yes. What are your plans for it? My plans are to run it well and grow it carefully and make sure the people who work there have job security and a future. I don't have an exit strategy. I'm not a short-term investor. I paused. You know the spring vendor review? The one for the large client? How do you know about the vendor review? I commissioned the due diligence report before I made the offer. I know everything about the company's financial situation, including that. He absorbed this. And I've already initiated conversations with 3 alternative clients through Meridian's business development team. Regional manufacturers who need Pacific Coast freight capacity and aren't happy with their current providers. If the spring review goes badly, we will have already begun building the pipeline to replace that revenue. Trevor looked at me across the kitchen table, his daughter, 26 years old, sitting in her $16 million house explaining the risk mitigation strategy for the company he had built. And his face did something I had never seen it do in 26 years of knowing him. He looked proud, not the reflexive, obligatory pride of a parent performing emotion. The real kind. The kind that surprises you, that catches in your chest, that comes from seeing someone be fully themselves in a way you hadn't expected and didn't know you were waiting for. Your grandfather was right about you, he said. He usually was, I said. About most things. He was right that you needed to do this without us knowing, without me knowing. Trevor set down the mug. Down. If I'd known about the trust when you were 16, I would have treated you differently. Not better. Differently in a way that wouldn't have let you become who you are. I know, I said. That's exactly what he said in the letter. He left you a letter. He left me a letter. Trevor nodded slowly. What did it say? That he loved me. I looked at my father. And that he hoped the rest of the family would eventually love me the right way, not because of what I had, because of who I was. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a wind had come up and was moving through the bare trees at the edge of the property, making the sound that bare trees make in December, a dry, patient sound, the sound of things waiting for spring. I'd like to try, my father said, if you'll let me. I'd like that, I said. We drank our coffee. We talked, not about the trust or the company or the house, but about other things, the things that had always been available to us and that we had somehow managed to talk around for 26 years. He told me about building Holland Maritime in the early years, when the company had been 2 boats and a dream and a desk in a storage unit in southeast Portland. I told him about my 3rd graders, about the boy with the gap in his front teeth who had finally, last October, understood fractions using a pizza analogy so simple it seemed obvious in retrospect. He laughed, actually laughed, not the polished social laugh I was accustomed to from him, but the real one, sudden and unguarded. You're good at that, he said, explaining things, making things clear. Grandpa said the same thing, I said. He said it's the most underrated skill in business. He said that to me, too. Trevor shook his head. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. I do now. We sat at the kitchen table in the house I had bought with money that had been waiting for me for 11 years, and we talked for 3 hours, and it was the best conversation I had ever had with my father. 3 weeks after that Thursday, I received the email from Robert Finch that I had been expecting since the morning I sat in a Las Vegas conference room and said, "Start the process." The email contained a scanned document, sealed, marked to be opened 60 days after will reading, per settler's instructions, that had been held by Ashworth and Weld according to my grandfather's specifications. Inside was a letter, 2.5 pages, handwritten, dated 8 months before he died. Different from the letter in Monaco. That one had been about the trust, about the history and the structure and the reasoning. This one was something else. It began. Faye, if you are reading this, it means 60 days have passed since the will reading. I do not know exactly what those 60 days look like, but I know you well enough to make some educated guesses. He wrote that he had anticipated my family's reaction, not with bitterness. He described my father and mother and Cole with a clarity and affection that was not diminished by its honesty, the way a doctor can describe a patient's condition with precision and love simultaneously. He had known them for decades. He understood their limitations as well as he understood their virtues, and he had designed the entire structure of the trust around both. Your father is a good man who built something real, he wrote. His blindness to you is not malice. It is habit. The difference matters. Habits can be broken. Malice, given enough time, becomes character. Watch for the difference. And then came the part that made me catch my breath. I want to tell you something about the trust that Elliot did not tell you because I asked him not to. Not to protect a secret, but because I wanted you to discover it yourself once you had seen the operations and met the people and understood the shape of what we built together. I use the word together deliberately. Faye, the Holland Legacy Trust was established 11 years ago, but it was built over 20 years. Every major operational decision I made for the Monaco property and the Las Vegas property in the last decade was informed by a conversation I had with you. I kept records. There is a notebook. Elliot will give it to you if you ask. He has been holding it for this purpose, in which I recorded, over 12 years, the things you said that changed how I thought about something. The entry for March of the year you turned 19 reads, Faye says the difference between a place that feels luxurious and one that merely looks luxurious is whether the staff seem genuinely glad you are there. Revised hiring criteria for Monaco property accordingly. Result: 11% occupancy increase in following quarter. The entry for your 22nd birthday reads, Faye asks why the Vegas property's breakfast menu doesn't have attractive options for dietary restrictions. She says it signals to guests that their needs are an afterthought. Forwarded to Dana. New menu implemented. Guest satisfaction scores up 4 points. There are 43 entries in that notebook spanning 12 years. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something that is more important than any number on a balance sheet. You did not inherit this empire. You helped build it. You just didn't know you were doing it. You thought you were having conversations. You were making decisions. That is who you have always been. And now you know it. Welcome home, Faye. All my love, always. Grandpa Walter. I called Elliot Ashworth the following morning. The notebook, I said. I've been expecting this call, he said. I'll send it by courier today. The notebook arrived 2 days later in a padded envelope from Geneva. It was a small, dark green hardcover notebook, the kind that fits in a shirt pocket, which is exactly where my grandfather had always kept it. The cover was worn at the corners. The pages inside were dense with his precise architectural handwriting, dates in the margin, entries running from 1 to 3 paragraphs, the paper slightly wavy in places from years of handling. I sat in the library of Kensington Estate with the notebook open on my knees, and I read it from the first entry to the last, and it took me most of an afternoon. 43 entries. 12 years. My voice, my actual voice, the way I actually thought and spoke and saw things, preserved in my grandfather's careful handwriting like pressed flowers in the pages of a book. Faye, age 17, says a good chess player doesn't win by being unpredictable. She wins by understanding her opponent's predictions and working one level above them. Applied to pricing strategy for Monaco Casino, adjusted the rate tiers, competitors' responses were exactly as she predicted. Faye, age 21, says that loyalty in a workplace comes from whether people believe the person in charge actually knows what their job is like. Forwarded to James Holloway. New policy. All managers spend 1 shift per month in a frontline role. Staff survey scores up significantly. Faye, age 23, says that the best customer service interaction she ever had was at a diner in Portland, where the server remembered her coffee order from 2 weeks before. No technology, no CRM system, just attention. The simplest things are the ones that stick. Thinking about how to systematize genuine attention. Paradox. Still thinking. That last one made me smile. I could almost hear him saying it, the slight wry edge in his voice when something interested him enough to keep him puzzling over it. Still thinking. He had been 91 years old and still thinking. I closed the notebook, held it in both hands. I thought about being 17 and 19 and 21 and 23, sitting across from my grandfather at various tables in various lights with various cups of tea going cold between us, talking about things I loved because he seemed genuinely interested, which was more than almost anyone else in my life had ever seemed genuinely without agenda. He had been interested. He had also been taking notes. But here was the thing. And this was the thing that the letter was pointing at. The thing I needed to hold clearly in my mind going forward. The fact that he had been using what I said did not diminish what I had given him. I had not been a resource he was extracting from. I had been a collaborator he was protecting until I was ready to know it. The difference between being used and being trusted is not always visible from the outside. Sometimes it only becomes clear when you see the whole shape of what was built. What we had built. I set the notebook on the shelf beside the Georgia O'Keeffe print that I had carried from my apartment and hung, in this new room, on the first wall I had arranged to my own taste. A flower so large it filled the entire frame, all color and geometry, nothing apologizing for its own scale. I understood it differently now. January arrived, cold and clean, and full of the particular Portland brightness that comes after the long gray of December, when the sun appears low on the horizon and everything it touches looks precise and new. I made 3 decisions in January that I think of as the beginning of the life I was always meant to be living. The first was about Holland Maritime. I called my father in the second week of January and asked him to come to the Kensington estate for a working meeting. Not a family meeting, a working meeting with a prepared agenda and relevant documents. He arrived with his own notes, which I appreciated. We spent 4 hours at the kitchen table, and by the end of it, we had agreed on a 5-year strategic plan for the company. The core of it was this: Holland Maritime would transition over 5 years from a regional Pacific Coast operator to a mid-sized sustainable freight carrier with a specialty in low-emission operations. The 2 new vessels currently under consideration would be specified for LNG fuel rather than conventional diesel. The business development pipeline that Meridian's team had begun building would target clients in the manufacturing sector, specifically Pacific Northwest manufacturers who were under their own SG pressure to demonstrate clean supply chains and would value a freight partner who shared that commitment. The concentration risk, the spring vendor review, was already being managed. By February, we had signed preliminary agreements with 2 new clients whose combined revenue, when fully activated, would reduce the top 2 client concentration from 67% to 44%. When the spring review came and went with the large client's contract reduced but not eliminated, the impact was manageable. Planned for, absorbed. My father sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me run the meeting, and at the end of it, he said, "You run a better meeting than I do." "Different style," I said. "Not better?" "No," he said. "Better. The preparation, the structure, the way you listen and then come back to a point 3 topics later when you've integrated it." He shook his head. "I've been running meetings for 30 years. I never learned to do that." "I learned it from chess," I said. "I know," he said. "I know exactly who taught you." We looked at each other across the table, and something settled between us. Not resolved, not finished, but settled the way a foundation settles after it's been properly laid, becoming something you can build on. "Teach me," he said. "What?" "Business, the way your grandfather taught you. Not the mechanics, I know the mechanics. The thinking underneath, the way you see things." He met my eyes. "I'm 58 years old, and I just realized my 26-year-old daughter thinks about business more clearly than I do. I can either be offended by that or I can learn from it. I'm choosing to learn." I looked at my father, this man who had been the architecture of my family my entire life, the structure I had been reaching toward without ever quite being able to touch, and I felt something open that had been closed for a long time. "Okay," I said. "Yes, let's do that." The second decision was the Walter Holland Foundation for Educational Excellence. I had been thinking about it since Monaco, since James Holloway had told me that my grandfather had built his operational philosophy around what ordinary people actually wanted. And since I had understood that I had spent 4 years in a classroom learning every day what ordinary children actually needed. The distance between those 2 things was not as large as it might seem. I registered the foundation in late January, with Finch's team handling the legal structure. The initial endowment was $40 million, enough to operate meaningfully for decades at a reasonable grant rate. The focus was STEM education support for underfunded elementary schools in Oregon and Washington. Equipment, curriculum development, teacher training, and small grant funding for teachers who had good ideas and no budget for them. I did not hold a press conference. I did not write a press release. I called the principal of Maplewood Elementary, where I had taught for 4 years, where a boy with a gap in his front teeth had learned to sound out the word triumphant, and I said, "I'd like to start here. Can we meet next week?" The principal, a woman named Dr. Patricia Adler, who had been running the school for 14 years and had developed the capacity for dispassionate response to surprising information that all long-term school administrators seem to acquire, said, "I will make time. What day works for you?" The first Walter Holland Foundation grant went to Maplewood Elementary. It funded a new science lab, a set of classroom coding kits for every 3rd through 5th grade classroom, and a full year's salary for a dedicated STEM specialist position. Dr. Adler cried a little when I told her, and then apologized for crying, and I told her there was nothing to apologize for. That evening, I sat in the library at Kensington Estate and thought about my grandfather, about his notebooks and his letters and his 43 entries and his patient, careful, long game way of loving the people he loved. And I thought about the children who would learn things in a better equipped room because a man who had been dead for 3 months had once listened carefully to a young woman talk about what she cared about, the chain of attention, how far it reaches, how long it lasts. The third decision was about Cole. He came to Portland in late January, as he had said he would. He came alone, drove up from Seattle in the car he had bought with part of the inheritance money. A sensible car, I noticed, not one of the flashy choices I might have predicted from him 2 months ago. He came to the house, and we sat in the library and we talked for a long time. The kind of talking that brothers and sisters sometimes manage when the performance has been cleared away and only the actual people remain. He told me what he had been thinking about. He had been thinking about the fact that he had never, in 30 years, been genuinely bad at anything that mattered to him, because he had never genuinely tried at anything that mattered to him. He had always had the Holland name as a cushion, the Holland money as a net, the Holland connections as a ladder. He had floated, pleasantly, through a life that had not asked enough of him. I want to know what I'm actually capable of, he said. Without the name, without the connections, just what can Cole Holland do if Cole Holland has to do it himself? I looked at him across the library. He was 30 years old and, for the first time I could remember, completely serious. Holland Maritime has a logistics coordinator position open in the Portland office, I said. Entry level, market salary. The hiring manager doesn't know you're a Holland. That's easy to arrange given the corporate structure. You'd go through the standard application and interview process. Cole was quiet. Entry level, he said. Yes. Application and interview. Yes. And if I get the job, if you get the job, you do the job. Exactly like everyone else. No special treatment, no fast tracking, no calling in family favors. If you're good, you'll move up. If you're not, you'll learn what you need to learn and try again. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the bookshelves. Outside the library window, Portland was clear and cold and winter bright. What if I'm not good at it? He asked. Then you'll find out what you're not good at, which is useful information, and we'll figure out what comes next. You'd still... He stopped. You're my brother, I said. That's not contingent on performance. The job is contingent on performance. The family is not. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I'll apply. Cole Holland applied for the logistics coordinator position at Holland Maritime on a Wednesday morning in February, listing his education and his work history, which was thin but honest. He was interviewed by a hiring manager who did not know his last name meant anything in particular. He was offered the job 3 days later, not as a favor, but because he interviewed well, and the hiring manager said he asked unusually good questions about operations. He started the following Monday. He did not ask me how it was going. I did not ask him. We had agreed without saying so that the job was his to figure out, and that the space to figure it out was the greatest gift I could give him. 3 months later, his manager's quarterly review noted that he was detail-oriented, proactive, and unusually good at spotting inefficiencies in routing logistics. I read the review. I read all the quarterly reviews as part of my oversight of the company. And I smiled and said nothing and kept it to myself. Spring came to Portland in early March. Tentative at first, the way spring always comes to the Pacific Northwest. A day of warmth followed by 3 days of rain, the trees making their cautious decisions about blossoming in stages rather than all at once. The garden at Kensington Estate, which the previous owners had planted with care, began to show color. Crocuses along the stone path, a line of snowdrops at the edge of the lawn, and at the far end of the property, a row of cherry trees I had not known were there beginning to think about their blossoms. I stood at the library window one morning in late March and looked at those cherry trees and thought, I have been here 4 months. This is already home. My best friend Lily Carter called that afternoon. We had been talking at least once a week since I had moved to the house. She was the one person outside my family who knew the full story, knew it from the beginning because I had called her on the night of the will reading and told her everything in a long, halting, sometimes tearful phone call that had lasted until 2 a.m. Lily was still at Maplewood, still teaching 4th grade. She had gone through the Walter Holland Foundation grant process with Dr. Adler and had been allocated funding for a project she had wanted to pursue for 3 years, an after-school engineering club for girls in grades 3 through 5. The first meeting was yesterday, she said. 14 girls showed up. 14, Faye. We only expected 8. That's wonderful, I said. One of them, she's in 3rd grade. She's 8 years old. She designed a bridge out of popsicle sticks in 40 minutes that held 12 books. 12. The existing classroom record was 9. A pause. I thought of your grandfather when I saw it. Me too, I said. Do you miss teaching? I had been asked this before. I had given various versions of the answer. Yes, sometimes, not the way you might think. I still find it in other places. But standing at the library window, looking at the cherry trees that were finally, that morning, deciding to bloom, I answered differently. I think I'm still teaching, I said. The subjects are different, the students are different, but the thing underneath it, helping people understand something they couldn't see before, that's still what I do every day. That, Lily said, is the most Faye Holland sentence I have ever heard. I laughed. The real kind. Sudden and unguarded, the kind my father had shown me it was possible to have. Come see the cherry trees when they're fully out, I said. I'll make dinner. I'll bring wine, she said. The good kind. Which, for the record, I can now afford, because my rent went down this year and I have no idea why, but I'm not complaining. I did not tell her why her rent had gone down. The Holland Legacy Trust had quietly acquired the building where Lily lived 18 months ago, as part of a Portland residential real estate investment. The rent reduction was a consequence of new management's approach to long-term tenant relationships, which prioritized stability over maximum extraction. It had nothing specifically to do with Lily, or rather, it had to do with a principle I had arrived at through 4 years of watching what it meant to live carefully on a teacher's salary, which was itself a principle I had articulated to my grandfather over chess, which he had written in his notebook, which had become a policy, which had, in a very long, very indirect way, made my best friend's life slightly easier. The chain of attention, how far it reaches. See you soon, I said. The family dinner in April was the first one I hosted at Kensington Estate. I had been to my parents' house several times since the December revelation, for my mother's birthday in January, for a casual Sunday lunch in February, for a family dinner in March that had been, by any measure, the most genuinely relaxed family gathering I could remember. But this was the first time I had hosted, and it felt important in a way I couldn't entirely articulate. Something about bringing people into the space that was mine, the space that fit who I actually was, and seeing whether the people I loved could be at home in it. They came. Trevor and Delia. Cole, who drove down from Portland, where he had recently moved to be closer to the Holland Maritime office. Brooke and Greg, who had been genuinely warmer since the winter, not performatively warm, but actually warm, the difference perceptible to anyone who had been paying attention to the distinction for 26 years. I cooked. This surprised them, I think. I had always helped in other people's kitchens, had always been the one clearing dishes and wiping counters, but I had never been the one at the center of the production. I made a leg of lamb with herbs from the garden, roasted vegetables, a salad with ingredients from the farmer's market, and a lemon olive oil cake that I had learned to make from a recipe I had found in a cookbook I bought at a small bookshop in Monaco in October, on an afternoon when I'd had 3 hours between meetings and had wandered through the old town looking at things. They sat around the long dining table, the table I had chosen, in the room I had arranged, in the house that was mine, and we had dinner together. It was not a perfect dinner. Cole made a slightly clumsy joke that landed badly and required a recovery. My mother said something about the kitchen design that was meant as a compliment and came out sounding like a critique and then overcorrected in a way that was more uncomfortable than the original comment. Trevor talked too long about Holland Maritime at one point, until Delia put her hand on his arm and he recalibrated, which was a gesture I recognized as one they had been doing for years, but which I was seeing clearly for the first time as what it was. A small, practiced act of care, one person steadying another. It was not a perfect dinner. It was a real one, which is what I had wanted. Not a performance of a family that had resolved everything and arrived at warmth and understanding. An actual family, complicated and imperfect and trying, gathered around a table because that is what families do. They gather and they try, and the trying is the thing that matters. After dinner, when Brooke and Greg had gone home and Cole had fallen asleep on the library sofa with a book open on his chest, some things do not change, I walked out onto the back terrace with my father. The April night was clear and cool. The cherry trees at the far end of the garden had come and gone. The blossoms had lasted 2 weeks and then blown away in a late March wind, carpeting the lawn in pink and white for a day before the rain collected them and moved them on. Now the trees were simply green, fully leafed, patient in the way of things that have already done their most beautiful work and are content to be themselves for the rest of the season. Trevor and I stood looking at the city lights. He'd have liked this house, my father said. He'd have had opinions about the kitchen layout, I said. He always had opinions about kitchens. He had opinions about everything. A pause. He was usually right. Usually. Always. About the things that mattered. Trevor put his hands in his jacket pockets. He was right about you. He was right about what you needed. He was right that I would have gotten in the way if I'd known. Not on purpose, but I would have. I would have tried to manage it. Manage you. Made it about the family name rather than about who you are. I know, I said. I'm glad he didn't let me. I looked at my father in the April night. 58 years old, gray at his temples, hands in his pockets, standing in his daughter's garden, looking at the city that spread below us like a proof of something. Dad, I said. Yeah. Thank you for coming tonight. He turned to look at me. Of course. Not just tonight. For trying. For choosing to learn rather than to be offended. For coming to the kitchen table and talking for 3 hours and asking me to teach you things. I paused. That was brave. That cost you something. He was quiet for a moment. It cost me a version of myself I had been holding on to too long, he said. Some things that cost something are worth it. Grandpa said that, I said. I know. He said it to me about the company 20 years ago when I was considering an expansion I was afraid of. He said, the things that cost you something are the only things worth doing, Trevor. The cheap ones don't leave any mark. He smiled slightly. He was quoting someone. He always was. Himself, probably, I said. We stood in the garden for a while longer, not saying much, the city below us and the night above us and the cherry trees behind us already thinking, no doubt, about next spring. 1 year after the reading of the will, I stood on the terrace of Kensington Estate in the early October morning, with a cup of coffee I had made myself and the specific autumn light that arrives in Portland like a homecoming. The leaves on the maples at the edge of the property had begun to turn. Not dramatically yet, just the first suggestions of red at the margins, the tree signaling its intention before committing to it. I found this endearing, the staged nature of autumn, nothing happening all at once. I thought about the October morning a year ago when I had driven to that office downtown and sat in a leather chair and waited for my name to be called and been given an envelope that the people around me thought was empty. I thought about the elevator ride, the 3 items on the pale paper, my hand shaking enough to make the document rustle, $312 million. A year later, the trust had grown to just over $940 million in total asset value. The result of strong operating performance from the Harlan Grand and continued appreciation in the London and Sydney portfolios, offset slightly by the capital I had deployed into Holland Maritime's operational improvements and the foundation endowment. Dana Reeves had begun preliminary planning for a renovation of the Vegas property's casino floor that, if executed well, would position the Harlan Grand competitively for another decade. James Holloway had implemented 3 operational changes in Monaco based on questions I had asked in our weekly calls, all of which had improved guest satisfaction scores. Finch's investment team had restructured the portfolio's fixed income position in a way that modestly improved the risk-adjusted return profile. And Holland Maritime had, in its first full operating year under Meridian's ownership, grown its client base by 3 new accounts, reduced its customer concentration ratio to below 40%, and generated an operating profit 14% above the prior year's performance. My father sent me the annual report by email with a single-line note. Not bad for a company that needed saving. T. I printed it and put it on the library shelf next to the green notebook. The Walter Holland Foundation had in its first year distributed grants to 31 schools across Oregon and Washington, reaching approximately 14,000 students. The engineering club at Maplewood had expanded into 5 additional schools. The girl who had built the bridge out of popsicle sticks. I had met her at a foundation event in March, a small, serious person named Grace who shook hands with the gravity of someone who had already decided to become an engineer, had won a regional STEM competition in May. I thought about the entry in my grandfather's notebook. Faye says the best customer service interaction she ever had was at a diner where the server remembered her coffee order from 2 weeks before. No technology, no system, just attention. A $14,000 grant to a school in Medford, Oregon, had purchased materials for a robotics curriculum. This had led to a teacher named Mr. Warren, who had been trying to start a robotics program for 3 years without funding, finally being able to run it. Among the students in Mr. Warren's first robotics class was a boy named Daniel who had been struggling in traditional academic settings and found, for the first time, something he was good at. Was good. Daniel's mother had written a letter to the foundation. We received many letters, in which she said, "My son came home from school last Tuesday and said, 'Mom, I think I know what I want to be.' He has never said that before." The chain of attention. I set down my coffee cup, picked up my phone, opened the call log. I called the number I called most often these days. Not Finch, not Ashworth, not Dana or James, but my father. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning," he said. "You're up early." "I'm always up early," I said. "Do you want to have breakfast? I'll come to you." A beat. "That would be good," he said. "Your mother made too much of everything as usual. Come at 8. "I'll be there," I said. I went inside to get my keys. In the library, the green notebook sat on the shelf where I had placed it in January. On the shelf above it, the Georgia O'Keeffe, all color and geometry, nothing apologizing for its own scale. I was 26 years old, and I was $890 million. And I was a former 3rd grade teacher, and I was my grandfather's legacy, and I was my father's daughter, and I was, finally, completely and without reservation, myself. I picked up my bag. I drove the Honda Civic to my parents' house for breakfast. I still had not fixed the dent in the rear bumper, and I had decided that I was not going to. Some things you keep as they are because they tell the truth about who you were, and that truth is worth more than the smooth, unmarked version. The leaves were turning on the drive over, red at the margins first, the trees signaling their intention before committing to it, everything in stages, everything, eventually, in full color. I want to close with something my grandfather wrote at the very end of his letter. The last letter, the February one, the one that came 60 days after the will reading. He wrote, "People spend their whole lives trying to be seen. The lucky ones discover, usually too late, that the more important skill is learning to see clearly, to see without wanting to be seen in return, to look at the world and the people in it and understand what is actually there rather than what you need to be there. You have always had this gift. You had it at 8 years old at the chessboard when you told me that the best players don't just plan their own moves. They imagine the board from every player's position simultaneously. You had it at 17 when you said that loyalty comes from whether people believe you actually understand their work. You have had it all your life. I did not give you this. I only made sure the world didn't take it from you before you knew how much it was worth. Use it well. Use it generously. And remember that the most powerful thing you can offer anyone, more powerful than money, more lasting than any gift, is the experience of being genuinely, carefully, completely seen. That is what I tried to give you. That is what you will give to others. Go on, sweetheart. The board is yours." Grandpa Walter. The board is yours. That is how I wake up every morning now. Not with the weight of $940 million, not with the anxiety of a woman managing more than she deserves, but with the quiet, settled certainty of someone who knows exactly where she is and exactly who put her there, and is determined to be worth every year of careful preparation, every notebook entry, every chess game played with patience on a kitchen table in Portland, Oregon, on all the ordinary afternoons of an extraordinary plan. The board is mine, and I am only just beginning to play. Thank you. Thank you for staying with me through all 3 parts of Faye's story. If it moved you, if you've ever been the person in the room that everyone looked past, if you've ever had someone believe in you more than you knew how to believe in yourself, if you've ever opened something that looked empty and found your whole life inside, then this story was for you. It was always for you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. It takes 2 seconds, and it means that the next time I have a story to tell, you'll be the first to hear it. And if this one reached you, if it traveled somewhere far to find you, please drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far these words went. Take care of yourselves, pay attention to the people around you, and never, ever underestimate the person in the room who is sitting quietly in the corner. They might be taking notes. Thank you for listening.